You know what the worst thing is? It's going into a screening ready to talk about your experience, to talk about your alignment with the position, ready to make your case to interview with the hiring leader. And then all of a sudden, you're asked a question about what salary you'll take. Now you're backed into a corner and you think, oh my gosh, there's no winning this. Like if I shoot too high, then I'm out of the running. They're just not going to call me back. And if I shoot too low, now they've anchored me and I have no negotiation room, even if the hiring leader wants the moon and the stars. So what do you do? Well, today I'm going to share with you a lot of the little scripts, the little statements that I share with my clients, and the three things that I would recommend to do to make sure that even though that conversation gets asked, and even though you join in that conversation, maybe even you share information as far as what you would like as your salary, you still are going to leave that conversation with room to negotiate a reasonable offer. And in many cases, you still have the opportunity to ask for more when it comes to the final negotiations. So let's talk about it. We'll start right now. Hey there, this is the Incoming Career Podcast, and I'm your host, Patricia Ortega, here to make your job search a little bit smoother. Now, today we are talking about what happens when you are asked to basically negotiate early, when you're asked about your salary before you even get in to see the hiring leader. Now, me personally, I don't believe that's fair. This company has a budget allocated and they're shopping around to see who is the best talent, who's the best fit, I should say, who's the person who has everything they need for this particular position. But because they know what they're looking for, they should have that budget allocated. And also because they're the bigger entity, we are a family of one, five, six, seven, however it is. They're a company of, 1,500 or a company of 500 or a company of 200 or a company of thousands of employees. And so they have this budget as a business. They typically should be a well oiled machine. And so they should know their numbers, right? Okay, so why does this question get asked if the company knows their numbers? Well, partially is to see what the employee says. And if an employee gives a number that is lower than what they expected to pay, guess what? They're going to stay right there. And they're going to say, hey, we're meeting their expectations. They're happy. We're happy because we saved some money, right? But then the other flip side of that is that they don't want a candidate to be unhappy if they are offered something that's at the maximum of the company's budget and the candidate's just not willing to take that. And so they want to know early on, which that's totally reasonable. But at the same vein, you have your time is valuable too. You have a need to make sure that you get paid well for your work. And in some cases, you may want to know that range. So, we're going to talk about what to say so that you don't give the number first, even if you really need to know that you guys are in alignment before you move forward. Okay, so let's start first with deferring and deflecting until after interviews. Now, before we even get into this, I should mention that sometimes I'll ask a client, hey, do you have an interview ready? And they'll be like, yeah, I've got an interview. It got scheduled. I'm so excited. Awesome. What company is it with? They'll tell me the name. And I'm like, really? Because I don't think you've met with HR before in that company. Oh, no, this is my first interview. And that's when I realized, that's not an actual interview. That is likely a screening. So typically, the first quote unquote interview is actually a screening. It's a shorter conversation, not with the person who's going to hire you, right? The hiring leader who's going to give you your day to day duties, who's going to manage and supervise you, who's going to be essentially looking at your success and deciding what means success for your position. Now, in a screening, we're talking to a recruiter or a talent acquisition professional, someone who is, in a sense, screening or vetting you to decide whether or not they want to place you in front of the hiring leader for a deeper conversation. And that screening is not what's going to give you the information that you need about the position. You'll have some details, but you're really going to get the full scope from the hiring leader. So just wanted to clear that piece up. And what we want to do here is deflect and defer the salary conversation until after interviews with that hiring leader so that you're really clear on expectations. Now, this is helpful for you because of those expectations, but it's helpful for the recruiter because it's going to show them that you are confident in what your role entails and you're confident in the value of that work in this industry. So, whatever industry you're applying to, they usually have like a ballpark, right? An average. And of course, it's going to fluctuate depending on location, right? A position in Tennessee is going to be significantly different than a position in New York or in California. So, you knowing that you are showing them that you understand the market in terms of this is the role, this is the work to be done, this is the size of company, this is the industry, and this is the location. So, ballpark, our salary range should be right around this area, right? Anyhow, all of that to say, number one, deflect and defer until after interviews. And here's a couple statements you can use to make sure that you are preserving your own leverage and that you're not anchoring too low for what their needs are. You can say, I'm really happy to talk about compensation once we both had a chance to confirm that this is the right fit. Right now, my priority is really understanding what the role is, the scope of the role, and how I can add the most value here. A second option you might say is, I'd really prefer to revisit the amount after we've aligned on expectations and the impact that you'd like to see. And then finally, you might say something like, in these conversations, I really found that it's most productive once there's clarity on scope and on outcomes. You might even own that a little bit more. And you might say, every time I have one of these salary conversations early, what I've learned is that it shifts when we talk more about the scope and the outcomes. And so I would love to talk about this more, maybe after the interviews. So what you're doing is, again, you're deflecting, you're deferring until after interviews, but also you're doing it in a way that doesn't say, I don't want to give you an answer until after interviews, but more of, here's my reasoning why. And it's reasoning that makes logical sense because it should be after the interviews, after you've learned more about the position. Because yes or no, haven't you been in a role or in a hiring process where you go into the interview and you're excited because you read the posting and you're like, oh, absolutely, I can do this. This has reasonable boundaries. The scope is great. It sounds like right up my alley and exactly what I would like to do on a day-to-day basis. And then you walk into the interview with the hiring leader and you realize what they put on the posting and what they actually want are two different things. And what they actually want is for you to build out an entire new system. Now you realize, oh, this work is worth way more than what the average person with this title would be making. So now we're in a whole different ballpark. Okay, so again, number one, deflect and defer until after interviews. Number two is to ask for their budget to establish their ballpark. What I mean is sometimes you might have one of these statements that are perfectly fine, but then the recruiter presses you a little bit more. They really want to know what your salary expectations are. Or maybe it's the flip side. Maybe you need to know because you're like, I can't go through an 8-step hiring process, right? I've heard this company has an 8-step hiring process, and I can't go through these 8 steps over the next 3 months without knowing what the salary is because, we're on a tight budget. I need to get hired yesterday and I want to know if this is worth my time. Whatever the case might be, I'm shifting industries and I want to know if this particular role is going to fit within what my needs are. For whatever reason, if you are going to talk about salary, you want to make sure that they share their budget first. Here's a couple of statements that are going to help you to shift the anchor from your expectation, which again, let's remember, they're a bigger entity. They actually do have a set budget. You might be more flexible if you get like the right things that you would like out of this position because you're one person or you're a couple or you're a family of 5, of 7, of whatever it is, you're still more flexible than they are and they have a set budget again. Okay, so statement number 1, you can say, let's say they press you for it or you really need to know what the budget is. You can say, I'm really flexible depending on scope and expectations. Are you open to sharing the budgeted range for the role so that we can confirm that we're in the same ballpark? So what you're doing here is you're letting them know, I know that you have a budgeted role. So what is that? And we can go ahead and confirm. So you assuming that that's there is going to just kind of take that question out. Because sometimes it can ask like, I'll show you the second statement. The second statement actually asks, what's the range for this role? Or maybe you might ask it differently. You might say, is there a budgeted range for this role? Then the answer would be like, no, we don't really have one. Where are you then? Right? So you want to assume that there is a budgeted range because more likely than not, there probably is. I can't say 100% of cases, but there usually is some sort of a budget that they're working within. Anyway, the second statement you can have here is, I really want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I appreciate you bringing up this conversation. What range has been allocated for this role? That silence at the end of that statement or question is so important. So you want to make sure and use silence to your benefit. Silence gives them an opportunity to think and process the question, but silence also lets them know that you are in control during this conversation. Not in control of the conversation or in control of them, but in control of yourself in terms of, I'm not feeling any kind of anxiousness or nervousness around this conversation, even if you are. You want to make sure and end that question and then just let it be. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time as well. What range has been allocated for this role? And silence. All right. Now, a third statement you might say is, I'm sure that you've scoped this role really carefully. What compensation range are we working in? And so again, this all of these statements assume that they have in fact a budgeted range. And so again, it takes that question out of the equation. Now, of course, it's possible that your recruiter will say, well, we actually don't have a range, and that's fine. But again, they need to have a range. Even if they don't have a set budget, like you're not going to say it's not 400,000, it's not 20,000. For most positions, you're going to be somewhere in a specific range. Anyway, if you and the recruiter are getting along. And if this is your style, you might use a bit of humor. You might say, listen, I'm just a one person team. And so I don't really have a set number. I'm pretty flexible, but you're pretty large. My guess is that y'all have a ballpark. And so if you're willing to share it, I promise you, I'll tell you if we're on the same page. Now, everything depends on personality. And of course, you have your own way of sharing this, but just something to kind of drop in there that you can make this a slightly more casual conversation if you're getting along really well with the recruiter. And you can just kind of be like, hey, come on, be straight with me. Like, I know you've got a budget. Like, what's it looking like? Let's make sure we're both on the same page and we can move forward knowing that this is going to be a mutual benefit for the two of us. All right, so let's move on to the very last thing here. So, first we talked about deflect and defer until after interviews. Then we said, okay, if we really must share our budget, either for personal reasons or because they're pressing us, what do we do? But now, what if you use those two and they push for your number anyways? Right? They ask you for it and you're like, let's talk about it later. And then they're like, no, we need to talk about it now. And then you're like, well, what's your range? And they're like, no, we want to know your range first. Then what? Well, if it's absolutely necessary, you want to avoid under anchoring yourself, meaning you want to avoid out of fear that you don't want to outplace yourself so that they don't call you back because you're too expensive, right? You want to avoid under anchoring. You want to also keep the space open for negotiation. And not only keep it open, make it abundantly clear that you're going to return to this conversation after you've had a time to talk with the interviewer. So even if you leave that screening having given them a range, the good thing is that not only did you give a range, but you were super clear. So again, just to make this like an easy thing, if you're I know sometimes people will take notes. I've gotten those messages that are like, I'm taking notes throughout your podcast, which is amazing. If you're taking notes, here's what I would write down for this one. Number one, don't give one set number, give a range. Number two, you want to let them know in no uncertain terms that you are coming back to renegotiate. And then number three, never give a number without knowing that it is anchored in reality, meaning you're looking at what this position makes in this industry, in this location, at this size of company, right? So you might need to take a look at what you see on like salary.com or any one of those crowdsourced databases. Anyhow, those are your three things. And if absolutely necessary, here's what you can say. So, based on the number of roles of similar scope and complexity that I was doing some research on, I'm generally seeing opportunities in the range of X to Y. Now, that being said, I'm really most interested in understanding the full picture and then narrowing in from there. So, we can always come back to the conversation after the interview with the hiring leader. Again, here's the range. You did your research. And let's talk about it some more, meaning we're going to continue to flex this number up or down. And really, for your benefit, we're going to flex it up, assuming that the role does, reasonably accommodate that. Another thing you can say is, I've got a range in mind, but it's highly dependent on team size and what the charge is, the success metrics, and my fit. So my fit with the hiring leader. So let's talk about this after, but just a ballpark, right? I'm okay to move forward if the range is anywhere or if the salary is anywhere between X and Y. Last thing you can say here is, I'm less focused on a single number and more focused on mutual fit and the long term value I can bring to the organization. But a range between blank and blank would be reasonable for this kind of position. And again, we could talk more about it after the interview. Just different ways of saying the same thing. Okay, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're saying, let's have a conversation until after interviews. If they push or if you need to know, then what you're doing is getting their number first, their range first to make sure that y'all on the same page. And at the very end, if you absolutely must give a number, give a range, leave yourself room for negotiation in the future. Now, above all else, remember that a calm demeanor always wins. So, the most important thing right before that screening call, especially if you think they're going to ask you for salary or if they even tell you to come prepared to talk about salary, is to remain calm. One of the worst things, and I always say this, well, I don't want to say one of the worst things, but one of the things you want to watch out for is cramming right before the test, meaning you are looking at statements and you're listening and absorbing all this information and trying to have it all in your brain right before the screening. The best thing you can do for yourself right before any situation, really, but right before this conversation is to just let your mind clear up. Take a walk without any reading material, without any podcast. Just take a walk and just let your mind kind of curiously go where it's going to go. Give your mind some space, create an emotional barrier to make sure you come into that conversation cool, calm, collected, and neutral, if not positive, in terms of emotion. And then also remember that silence is golden in these conversations. It gives people time to think and it lets them know that you are in control, which helps you to keep the chips that you have, to keep the leverage, while again, making this a positive conversation. The last thing I'll say is never apologize for not giving your salary early. And so if someone says, well, we really need to know your salary, and you respond with, I'm so sorry, I'm not really comfortable sharing about salary right now. It places the focus and an emphasis in the wrong space. It makes it seem like, oh, I'm sorry, I really can't. But then they know they have leverage because you're apologizing. So then they ask for it again. And then you feel so bad, you give it anyways. And now you realize, oh my gosh, I wasn't even thinking about the number. So I anchored myself too low. Instead, when they say something like that or they're pushing for it, you'd say, I'd really prefer, or you might say, what I found in these conversations is, and so you're avoiding the apology because there is no need for you to apologize. This is something that they want. Okay, great. But they should also have that salary, which is why we have salary transparency laws that we wish that everybody followed. But that's a conversation for a different day. All right. So I hope your next salary conversation goes well, especially if it's too early on, like in screening. And yeah, I pray that in those conversations you feel peace about the, numbers that you're sharing. I pray that you come into that conversation full of wisdom and of course research and logic, and you share that with them in the right time. All right, until then, know that Denise and I, we are cheering you on. We're praying for you, and we'll see you on the next one. Hey, thanks for listening. I really appreciate you spending time with me today. If you found this episode helpful, please tap the 5-star review on the show's homepage in your podcast app. It would absolutely make my day, and it helps others discover the Uncommon Career Podcast. Now, to download your free career resources and learn how I help seasoned professionals land amazing offers in as little as 90 days, click on the link in the description or go to theuncommoncareer.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one.